Thank you so much. It's a great privilege to be with you. Unfortunately, obviously not as nice as being with you in person. I'm bringing you some thoughts from Europe, from Berlin. And in order to do that, I'll share my screen and share a few thoughts with you. What I want to do over the next 20 minutes is ideally, I know it's very difficult, but have a bit of a conversation. So if you have questions, if you have comments, please use the Q&A function. I'll be speaking for about maximum 15 minutes so that we have 5 minutes at least to go into some of your questions. So please don't hesitate, put up every concern, idea and thought that you have. And I look forward to have at least a little bit of an exchange over this very long distance. So how do we deal with this very difficult situation? First of all, I think it's wonderful that we're all here because it means probably that we're healthy and safe. And I know that I'm personally very thankful for that. But at the same time, next to this tremendous health crisis, there's obviously a big economic crisis. And the question is, how do we reevaluate some of our basic understandings of how the economy works? And how do we think about what role it should play in society? And we've been, over the last 10 years, been working with global companies across the world in trying to answer exactly that question. So where are we at right now? Those of you who are working in retail know that currently what we're looking at the question of how will consumption behave, but certainly there's a decrease in consumption right now. Many companies that we're working with are experiencing the problem of overstock. It doesn't matter whether it's fashion or also some other industries. That there is a tremendous question now about supply chain insecurity. If we look at some of the early problems that the crisis brought out, it's certainly that in certain sectors, like obviously the medical field, but also if you look at food or even other industries, the question of how does actually our highly efficient globalized world work properly means that we're very streamlined in where we're producing what and how we're getting it across the world. And that in times of a lockdown is a huge problem. So how do we deal with supply chain insecurities and what do we learn from them for the future? And last, and maybe most importantly, how do we all, because we're all consumers, of course, how are we all changing our patterns? What do we consider important? And what do we maybe consider not so important anymore? You know, I'm talking to board members who are saying, I don't even know what I'm doing with my suits anymore. I don't need them. I'm at home, I'm wearing comfy stuff. You know, so how are we changing our patterns? What I briefly want to discuss with you is, what are you as leaders, as startups, as people in industry, sort of making out of this crisis, and how are you looking at it? And you know, you might say, goodness, there's now tremendous economic downturn. Let's focus on our business. Let's get back on track. And all the big issues over the last 1-2 years around climate change, around the question of the social role of a brand, and the question of how we innovate better, need to wait until we're back on track. And if you have inclinations where you're saying, well, our economic focus might contradict our focus on innovation, on environment, and our people, then my motivation of being here with you this morning or this afternoon is really to try to appeal to you that you should reconsider. And that now more than ever, it is crucial that you ask yourself, why are you around? And it is crucial to answer that question by actually playing a positive role for your consumers, your customers, your people, your employees, and the world. And I briefly want to show you why there's plenty of evidence that shows that brands that actually have a clear and strong purpose are going to be the winners and are going to emerge stronger from the crisis. So when I talk about purpose, what do I mean? When I talk about purpose, what I mean is that a brand has very clearly asked itself, why do I exist? Why am I here for? What problem am I solving? And in a way, turn that into a positive image and turn that into concrete action that makes them an environmental leader and that makes them play a positive role in society. And the positive outcomes that result from becoming a purposeful brand, if you want, are manifold. I want to highlight a couple of them. With more and more sort of consumers looking at their consumption behavior, and especially now with less money being available, what we see is that consumers ask themselves very deliberately, what is it that I'm spending money for? And sort of what is it that I actually need? You know, a moment of crisis is very much a reflection on what do I need to live and what do I need in order to sort of have a certain sense of satisfaction or happiness. And if you can claim very clearly that with your brand and with your product, you're actually fulfilling a clear purpose, there's a clear reason of why you should be there, and you're not just another t-shirt or another product, then you also have a very good argument towards your customers. Another benefit is that actually having a clear purpose helps you to innovate faster. And innovation right now is incredibly important because almost all of us are changing and adapting. Just look at us, how we're getting together today. Sort of a year ago, this was all in person. Right now, we're sitting all in front of our screens. So we're all adjusting, we're adapting. And brands and companies that know very clearly why they exist tend to be very good at then also adapting faster. Ultimately, having a clear purpose helps you to engage your employees, to make your employees the drivers of your brands, to also deal with change more successfully, be more resilient. And that's measurable, translates directly into a stronger brand value. So brands that have a clear purpose, that play a positive role in society, have more satisfied, more loyal, but also more effective employees that ultimately are great ambassadors for your brand, and as a result, actually drive your brand value. And last but not least, I've briefly heard it from the previous session, the words ESG sort of were used. So more and more investors are actually looking at brands that have a positive environmental and social role. So there's plenty of good arguments of now, even if you're in a crunch and even if you're looking at how do I deal with cash flow, how do I deal with my points of sales, how do I look at sort of my immediate future, not the next 5 years, but the next year, to still think about how does this crisis give you an opportunity to actually sort of pivot, drive a clear purpose, and sort of take on a positive environmental and social role. And if you want to, by the way, learn more about that, sort of our leaders in Hong Kong actually have a booth at Start Me Up Hong Kong at Connected Retail Experiences. So Dr. Anson Wong and Isan are waiting for you there in order to explore and discuss and just have a conversation with you on this, because there's no easy answers. You have to find your own vision and direction there. But we certainly have lots of experience to be able to help you with. What I want to sort of spend the last couple of minutes before I want to open it up to questions is sort of give you a sense of what the many companies around the world that we work with actually consider a purposeful retail business to look like. And we've been doing a big study that was actually concluded just before COVID-19. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some of these learnings from that research, but then also I'm going to relate a little bit to what I believe sort of has changed within the realities of COVID-19. So let me go to the next slide. So how do our partners, how do companies in fashion, in furniture, in sort of fast moving consumer goods, how do they look at purposeful retail? So there's a couple of points that they're really sort of focusing on, and I'll quickly go through them with you. So obviously, none of them should be surprises to you, but it's maybe interesting to see them in an overview. So how do you blend online and offline, of course? How do you become part of your local community? So as global brands, how do you embrace the local? How do you sort of develop a workforce with soft skills that's not only, you know, measured by how much turnover it can create by square meter, but how actually it can create and be an ambassador for your brand towards the people that come into your stores or visit you online every day. How do you use big data to better understand customers, but also how do you reduce waste, right? And they're sort of really sort of morphing into the environmental topics. How do you make sustainability visible at the point of sale? So in the physical environments, how do you drive sustainability efforts? And how on then the non-visible parts, especially the supply chain, how do you become more collaborative in actually building a circular economy? And a circular economy cannot be built by any one business or any one brand. So that means collaborating with others to actually make sure that your supply chain becomes more environmentally friendly. How do you rethink your current infrastructure? How do you think about sort of how your setup is, and does that need to adjust due to the changing business demands? And ultimately, how do you then also diversify and localize your supply chain? So these are the key points that came out before COVID. So let me just briefly share you my reflections of what's been happening over the last 4 or 5 months and what we've been working on. So what I want to highlight is 3 bits briefly. So the first one is obviously the further shift towards digitization. So the blending of online and offline, further to sort of tilting towards the offline. And I'm sure you've been sort of thrown a ton of stats sort of around this morning. So, you know, if nowhere where, it doesn't matter where you look around the world, pretty much everywhere, sort of online sales across all product segments has more than doubled. So board members that I talk to in Europe especially say that sort of, you know, COVID-19 has probably been the biggest digitization driver ever so far in this big transformation. But sort of what's really interesting is to say, how do we use sort of digital capabilities in order also to think about also adjusting our product portfolio? So one example that I want to give in the food industry is that what we've seen in Europe, I don't know how it is in Asia, is an explosion of businesses that deliver farm to table. So a big growth in organic produce that is delivered directly from the farmer in a green box onto your doorsteps. And this is something where sort of big brands have gone into, but also where startups over the last half years have grown tremendously. So that means sort of, it's not only about sort of using online or sort of your digital capabilities to obviously better understand your users, drive big data, and sort of drive your sort of your online sales, but also how do you think about new business models and how can you actually now make them sort of come about and really drive them as a result of the crisis. So that's the first one that I wanted to share. The second topic that I briefly wanted to share is this topic of embracing your local community. And we're working with one of the biggest global fashion retailers as a case study, just to give you a sense, to actually empower their stores to answer the question of what the relevance of the store is by giving the stores the power and the tools to play a relevant role in the community. So to be a place that's not only about selling X or selling Y, but a place that has relevance to the people that live in the community. And so each store actually gets time and even a budget to explore and answer that question. And that might mean that a store opens up to an after-school program for kids. That might mean that a store opens up to local designers and features them. That might mean that a store actually takes on an environmental responsibility for the community. But the logic is that no matter how global you are, no matter how much turnover you make online, you have to use your offline presence, your point of sale, to be relevant, not globally, but locally to the people that visit you there. And that is something that over the last weeks and months, and we believe over the course of the next years, will only become more important. Lastly, I want to close by actually looking briefly at sort of the question of supply chains, because that in our view is one of the trickiest ones. So that we work with some partners who are really rethinking their supply chain system in going from a sort of globalized supply chain where mass-produced goods are then shipped around the world to sort of basically a sort of designs and IP that is global, but then production that is local and that can happen across the world all over the place. that might have an interesting environmental footprint application. It also might be interesting in terms of speed. The question how that relates to the social question of, especially in Asia, many countries that have had tremendous economic growth due to sort of retail production is a different question, and how to navigate that is a really tricky one. For the last couple of minutes, I now want to really listen to your questions, so please share them in the Q&A. And what I want to sort of leave you with at the end is really just one sort of statistics. We've had a conversation last week with one of the leaders from Swedish sort of home giant IKEA. And sort of the leader there told us that they just did a recent sort of survey of their customers globally. And they said 9 out of 10 customers want to live a more sustainable, a more environmentally friendly life. 9 out of 10. But only 1 out of 10 claimed that they know how to. So there's a huge discrepancy, and as a result, a huge sort of opportunity for purposeful businesses to drive relevant products and services that make you an environmental and a social leader. All right, so now I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to look at some of your questions. And then, so first one, what can we do to keep a retail business not dampening the original vision when it gets larger? I think that's a great question for every startup, doesn't matter in which industry. And in our experience, what is a really great tool for that is something that's called purpose alignment. So you keep building a strategy question into your growing organization that looks at the business's purpose, it looks at the employee's purpose. So what am I excited about? What's my purpose? And how do I contribute? And if you continue to make that alignment, as we call it, then that's something that in our experience can really help businesses to stay on point. But if you want to learn more about it, also find the booth and find Isan and Anton to discuss this more in detail. It's always hard. So there's a lot of questions, so I'm going to have to select a couple of them. Apologies if I don't get to answer all of them. It's always hard to balance profit and social good. What do you think? Yes, it is. So I work a lot with social entrepreneurs all around the world next to our work with global corporates, and sort of managing profit and social impact is a really difficult bit. And what I strongly believe is that there's value in pragmatism. So there's value in seeing how, with what it is that you do, you can actually use growth, economic growth that comes through turnover, to actually have a stronger environmental and social impact, and a positive one. And you have to actually stop looking at your growth when you see that your negative impact, your externalities become too big. So try not to look only at sort of what's the negative, but try to look at the negative and the positive and try to weigh them. And based on that, try to make your strategic decisions. I think I probably have time for one more. Can you explain more on what you mean by using your offline presence to make yourself more relevant? Examples. Yeah, so I'll try to re-pitch the example that I gave, because it's a case study I can talk about. And again, go to the booth and talk to the gang. So the point is, it's not enough anymore, we believe, to just have a beautiful shop somewhere and to have a store and then have a business case for that store or that point of sale. Make it connected. You know, I've seen a lot of money being spent on people trying to get the online offline connection right. You go into a point of sale, you find something that you like, you get scanned, it gets sent home. This is all nice, but we strongly see that this is not really what people care for. What makes a difference? What makes a difference is if you show that with your brand, where you are actually present physically, you have relevance for your surroundings. You're relevant to the people that walk by every day. And more of those people come visit you because you're relevant for the community. And how you answer that question is really different everywhere. That's a beautiful part, but you can systematically answer that question in all these different places. All right. It's been a tremendous pleasure being with you. I don't know how much time I've left. So what I'll do is I'll just keep talking until somebody interrupts me. If you want to learn more about the Do School, feel free to reach out to us. And I'm always happy to meet new people and welcome them to our campus in Hong Kong. So from your experience, any new technology devices would be coming up, which will be implemented in the retail business to bring more brand or customers experience. So again, sort of, I would make a plea to say that it's not about the tech device at the point of sale. Obviously, sort of the right integration and use, especially of data, is super important. But as I said now again and again, I think the question is, what is it that, where can you actually meet a human being with your brand in a way that it's relevant for that human being? Especially in times right now, where a lot of people ask how we're dealing with our growing inequalities socially, how we're dealing with our planet, and how we re-emerge stronger from this very, very difficult time for all of us.